Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us in week 2 on a capital on lockdown. I'm Matthew O'Neill, and today, as always, we ensure that we have a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership. First, we're joined by Alice Pearson, Director of the Household Cavalry Museum, an institution that celebrates the history and accomplishments of the Household Cavalry, offering a unique behind-the-scenes look at the work that goes into the ceremonial and armoured reconnaissance work of Her Majesty the Queen's Mounted Bodyguard. Alice, hello.
Hello, Matthew. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the program today. It's a very odd time for organizations around the country and indeed around the world.
It is.
We would be remiss if we didn't start the program by just addressing the COVID-19 situation.
Absolutely.
How has that affected the museum as an institution?
Well, we are in the heart of London, and we had to consider not only what the country was doing, but what the city was doing. We are overlooking the Prime Minister's back garden, so we have to really make sure that we're following all the rules. We closed to the public about a week ago. Our priority, of course, was our staff, but we didn't want to be the cause of any problems for anybody. So as soon as we knew that we had the board's approval and our staff were going to be okay, we closed our doors. Very sad time for us, first time in over a decade.
And of course, being in that unique location, I'm sure that it is rather busy in the Downing Street end of Horse Guards Parade, but I'd say in your end, it must be quite quiet.
It's very quiet. It's the Horse Guards Parade itself is a beautiful, very open space. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with it. It's one of the only areas in London that's not lit. So in the winter, it's very dark, but now it's also very empty. It's quite eerie.
What sort of precautions were set in place before the national lockdown?
Well, we just had to be very careful. We increased our personal hygiene. We briefed our team and made sure they felt comfortable with what was going on. And something that you don't really think about much, we have personal audio guides in 8 languages. So our visitors are predominantly international. And we just had to make sure that people were very comfortable with accepting those from us, clean them down with antibac and to be as hygienic as possible, put up signs in the toilets, and basically talked to people. I think that was the most important thing, to make sure people felt comfortable as soon as they arrived from like a visitor point of view and also a staff point of view.
And of course, for listeners who don't know, the Household Cavalry Museum is located just next to where some horses are stabled for the Mounted Guard at Horse Guards Parade. Have the horses been removed to the countryside during this period?
We have 4 very well-behaved horses on duty during the lockdown. Most of the horses live at the Hyde Park Barracks, and they come down to the Horse Guards building, which is the official entrance to the royal residence, every day. We have a stable for up to about 15 or 20 horses here, but we've only got 4 on duty, and they and a very dedicated team of Queen's Lifeguard are on lockdown duty for 28 days straight. The rest of the horses have been sent out to grass to try and relax a bit and enjoy themselves as much as they can.
Of course. Well, let's switch back to the subject of leadership. After all, that's why you're here. Now, I always like to start this conversation with a very simple question that sometimes has a rather complicated answer. What does the word leader mean to you?
Well, it's an interesting one. I think that has changed, especially in my time working in the last 15, 20 years. But I hope that nowadays a successful leader starts with listening. And what they really need to understand is the priorities of their team, the priorities of their business, and it's their job to connect those things if there's an initial disconnect. I think a leader is a good team player, but they also have to have a view of everything that's happening, and where your team members may have priorities in smaller pockets of the business, you as the leader have to be able to balance all of those sections of the business.
Now, of course, you're in a very unique position, being that you run an organization that is responsible for showing off the public face of the Army to the world, and also you're in the middle of a very delicate security area. What sort of challenges are placed on you and the museum as a whole due to the responsibility deviated from security?
Well, the regiment always has to come first. We've always got to make sure that the soldiers can do their job, and security is a part of that. We've got to be respectful to the Ministry of Defence Police and the Metropolitan Police, with whom we work very closely. Royal Parks actually own and run the parade ground, so we have to work in partnership with them. And we've got to make sure that although we walk the fine line between being a visitor attraction business and being a best practice museum, it's a big juggling act. So if we are told that we have to close for security, we have to respect that, because that's what we're here to show and promote and respect. Mm-hmm. There are frustrations when we have to close down, but you've got to remember we're not just one thing, and we've got to prioritise every aspect of those variety of things that we represent.
Now, of course, with such a heavy traffic area in such a high visibility organization such as yours, you need to keep standards up amongst your staff. How do you keep them motivated to keep those standards high?
We're very lucky to have quite a small team, but I think in today's society, people move jobs quite quickly, and I have several members that have been here since we opened. And when I joined, I was the new girl. So I found it really interesting to finding out why people have been here for a long time, and then learning to respect that. I came from quite a fast-paced background. So to come into a culture where people greatly loved their job and they felt very comfortable and associated with it, it was making sure that you had that respect for the style of work that they wanted to do, but also incrementally increasing more of the business and fast-paced side. So inspiring people to enhance and improve on the work was my key initial target, and I had to do that by showing the benefits of what we were trying to accomplish.
What has created that sort of world of wanting to stay there for so long?
Well, it sounds a bit corny, but it is very much like a family, or like a physical body. We have different members of staff who I'd say are the brains or the heart or the legs of what we do, and they're very inspiring to the younger students that come and work for us. We've got two fantastic part-time history and PPE students that work for us, and I think leading by example really has shown them the way forward. And it's really got, when you work for a regiment and everybody's pulling towards the same goal, everybody is important to each other, and without every single piece, you can't do the job. And I hope that that's what every member of the team sees, that without them we wouldn't be able to do what we can do. And your importance in the whole really shows you that you're vital.
Are there any pieces of the ethos at the museum that you wish that you had in you at your previous positions?
I think if I could have looked back on my time as a younger employee, I've worked very hard, and that was very nice, but perhaps I could have worked a little smarter. And I think I've definitely learned here to decide where the energy should go. I'm not saying to work at a slower pace, but sometimes to sit back. The gentleman who did the job before me was actually in a position where he was retiring when he left, and he was twice my age, and it was very interesting to see our approaches to work. And the more I'm in this job, the more I can see the benefits of his advice, especially with things such as COVID at the moment. One of his pieces of advice was eventually everything comes back, and we may be at a difficult time now, but the rhythm of the industry of travel trade and the rhythm of the museum and cultural industry will settle down, and then it'll blip up again. But you're in for the long haul, so you just have to weather the storm, was his advice. And I think if I'd known that when I was younger, I would have saved myself some anxiety.
Now, unfortunately, our time together is drawing to its close. But before I let you go, what does the next 12 months have in store for the Household Cavalry Museum?
Well, as much as we can predict, we had our 5-year plan, as any good business would do, and we're just being a bit more flexible with that now. The next 3 months, as we can imagine, will be a virtual museum that we're trying to build online. Very lucky to have the support of a regimental historian who's doing a podcast for us, so we're very excited about that. So we'll be pushing that online and then making sure that we're future-proofing as much as we can from a financial point of view to save funds while we're closed and have no income coming in, and then open with aplomb as soon as we can and build on the excitement that will be palpable in London at that point.
Well, Alice, it's been an absolute pleasure discussing leadership with you, and I very much hope you come back on the program when things have gone back to normal. We can discuss the museum a bit more in depth. Alice, thank you.
Matthew. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Alice Pearson, director of the Household Cavalry Museum. And now, if you haven't heard it before, is Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Sir Geoff Hurst.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, who realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him? Absolutely.
I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time, over 50 years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach, as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that of that calibre can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life, and that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham, and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved, and what a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bobby Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership, and that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after or at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era, I was involved for 6 or 7 years. It was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at the time, maybe overly strict, but at the time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in the organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learned over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprising they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in the game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Allen. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he'd moved one or two players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players and great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course, I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited, just had a glance round,
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you with. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions that absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely. But I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then. But we.
Well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Islands, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him, so I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic, and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitches, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is need to have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today, easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson is just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 25, 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
That's a good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody. And going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long time. And I wouldn't, when you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding. And I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We have some great players. We have some great players, of course, but without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Very good nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I have been your host, Matthew O'Neill. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, other guests, or any other person therein associated.